It was as if you had awoken into a nightmare. The people you once called friends were after you. In truth, you never questioned the vision and decree. Not like you were in any danger of it. Until now. Your only chance were the rebels, but you only had a rough idea where the resistance had its encampment. Your feet hurt, and your heart was screaming. But still, there were men chasing you down, taunting, shouting, laughing. Only now you understood the true extent of your hypocritical apathy towards the Vision Hunt decree. It truly was pathetic. And no desperate cries for help, nor your pleas for mercy were heard by anyone. Until you accidentally fell down a small cliff. The rain that had fallen the last night had made the area slippery. You groaned. The fall had knocked you out for a few seconds. You raised your head only to look up into the masked face of a Ronin. The man was mocking you, only to be interrupted by an arrow burrowing itself into his chest. The giant shouted profanities as he ripped the arrow out of himself, before pointing his drawn blade to the top side of the cliff. Your pursuers had caught up. Now too busy with the bandits. You gathered all your strength for a mad dash through the ruffians. The noises of battle soon quieted down behind you. Breathless and out of energy, covered in mud and blood, you fell forward onto the dirt. With a shaking hand, you took the vision that had manifested only mere hours ago out of your pocket. It was an animal vision. Its turquoise, glowing elemental energy created a soothing light. You rolled on your back to get a better look at it. You hated this rock. You hated it for ruining your life. The noise of a heavy boot splashing into a puddle shook you out of your thoughts. Your heart stopped for a moment as your life passed before your eyes. An Inazuma City warrior with a hooked polearm stood above you. "You little cunt," growled the man. "You thought you little Ronin would stop the will of the Shogun." You rolled on your stomach, attempting to crawl away. The man, however, laughed. And then you heard a mind-numbing grinding noise, followed by an instant, unbearable pain. You screamed in pure agony. The hook of the man's polearm had been lodged into your ankle. Your mouth was foaming from the pain. "You little vision bearers disgust me, flaunting your Archon-given powers." You stared back at your assailant. He grinned dirtily at you with a thin line of drool coming out of his mouth. "But you know, whenever I saw you walk around in that palace, I couldn't help but want a piece of that." He began fiddling with his belt as a horrifying realization overcame you. "I'll make sure your little blessing becomes your worst nightmare, little stray." Panicking, you kicked with your good leg, hitting him right where it hurt the most. He took a step back, screaming profanities. "Nah, you pay for that." The man took a step further, and then the noise of tearing flesh ripped through the air. Ah! If I were you, I'd run to a healer. said a voice from somewhere. The man stared at the arrow that was now protruding out of his chest. It just barely missed his heart. That arrow is serrated. If you value your life, you will leave immediately or suffer a painful death. You and the soldier shared one last glance at each other. He spit on the ground next to himself before quickly running off. You sighed and rested your head back on the soft mud. You no longer cared about the grime. Not like you could move with the still lodged-in hook in your foot. Only seconds later, quick and quiet steps approached you from behind. A boy, roughly your age. Clearly a beast man, judging by his dog ears and tail. I'm Goro, General of the Resistance. He kneeled down behind your feet and raised a finger. Don't talk, he said. Save your energy. You furrowed your brows, as if you had any energy left to begin with. Suddenly, his soft hand was on your chin, gently opening your mouth before placing a stick between your teeth. Bite down on it. You blinked, and then he ripped the hook out of your foot. Your screams were muffled by the piece of wood. As you bit on it so hard, your teeth hurt almost as much as the open wound. He then gently lifted your leg. After cleaning your wound with rubbing alcohol, the pain of which almost making you black out, he bandaged you up. You, have very delicate feet, he said. Goro blushed upon noticing your expression. I'm not a pervert, I promise. I just suck at pep talk like this. He forced a smile. He kept your leg lifted up, realizing that you couldn't walk like this. Plus, the mud would ruin this perfect bandage almost immediately. More awkwardly than necessary, he picked you up into an almost bridal-esque position. He walked for a few minutes, the both of you trying desperately to look into different directions, until you reached his camp. It wasn't big, just a campfire with a cookpot, 2 logs and a bag. He sat you down on one of them, and placed the bag under your injured leg. Tomorrow, we will run as fast as we can to the resistance camp. You nodded. While I did my best on your leg, I would feel much more comfortable knowing an actual field medic looked at it. Once again, you nodded, desperately hoping that by the end of this ordeal it wouldn't have to be amputated. Using flint and steel, he lit up the campfire. So, how did all this happen? He asked, and tilted his head. If I may ask, of course, he added. You sighed. I originally come from Mondstadt. When the decree began, I was stranded here. Through dumb luck, however, I managed to acquire a position as maid in the Shogun's palace. Goro's eyes widened. He couldn't wait to tell Her Excellency Kokomi about you. And with shaking hands, you showed him your vision. During tonight's banquet, it just appeared. You started to quietly sob. I don't even know how I managed to escape. Goro sat down next to you, comforting you by wrapping his arms around you. It's okay. It's over now. No, you cried. I'm still not home. I want to go back to Mondstadt. It's okay. Let it out. This will soon be over. He spoke. His heart sank. You probably didn't even know what you could do with your vision. The next day he was carrying you on his back across an idyllic beach in an attempt to reach the other rebels. You were both quiet, save for you occasionally sharply inhaling due to a wave of pulsating pain from your leg. He had changed the bandages before he started carrying you. The wound didn't look great. And this time his cleaning efforts had hurt far more. But you bit through the pain, desperately ignoring it. One question remained on your mind, however. Goro, you mumbled, trying to bite through your agony. Yes? He asked. How closely are you related to dogs? He blushed and looked away, and you blinked, placing a hand on his head almost instinctively. He let out an embarrassed huff, and you smirked. This was actually helping you to not think of your damaged foot. Also, his hair was wonderfully fluffy. You gently began to stroke through it. You could feel his tail swish under you from left to right. Slowly you increased the pressure and speed of your ministrations, while he himself stopped walking. He groaned and arched his back forward, almost throwing you off of him. But it just granted you further access down into his neck. However, instead, you grabbed one of his ears. Instantly his body shook. You moved no muscle, until you began to glide your fingers up and down his ear. He moaned, his legs twitching. You probably should stop now. Yet, you tightened your grip. His tongue rolled out of his mouth as he began to breathe heavily. You took a shaky step forward. Goro's mind shouted at him to throw you off, to call you a pervert and make you walk the rest of the way to camp, but his body refused, enjoying your petting and teasing just a tad bit too much. This bliss lasted until you went a step too far by saying, "Oh, you good boy." Instantly, he dropped you on the ground, both of you blushing heavily. He was out of breath. Goro looked at you for a moment before saying, I need to take a leak. I'll pick you back up in 15 minutes, okay? You blinked and nodded quietly. This had been your fault. You didn't talk until you reached the base camp, an uncomfortable silence having been put upon you. He dropped you at the medic tent while he reported your arrival to Kokomi and the other leading figures of the resistance. 2 weeks later, you were released from the tent and were given your own shelter. Her Excellency Kokomi herself had visited you while you had been treated. Her healing abilities were the only reason the minor infection you had didn't turn into anything major. At the same time, she chewed you out about any news and building changes in the palace. Every time she left, she did so with a pleased face, so maybe you were doing something right. After you had been returned to health, it had been decided, however, that you weren't made for battle, but due to your involvement with the Shogun, would remain in the camp for your own safety. You took on the hobby as a cook, it being the only thing that you were really good at, while Kokomi herself sought to teach you how to utilize your vision. But you haven't seen Goro since. Not until one night, a visitor entered your tent. "Hey," said a shaking voice, forcing you awake. "What? Are we under attack? Shh. The person interrupted. You rubbed your eyes. Goro? Is that you? You asked. The silhouette above you visibly nodded. Would you like to watch the sky with me? He asked, and you blinked. What? There's a meteor shower happening. You smiled. Sure, you said. You followed the dog-eared general to a grass field. The wind was slowly picking up, giving a comfortable, cool breeze as you both laid down. It was just like he said. Shooting stars shot across the sky. It was beautiful. Yet why was he spending a moment like this with you? It would have made much more sense to you if he spent this tender moment with Her Excellency. You glanced at him, smiling. His eyes glowed in the light of the moon and the stars. Suddenly he noticed you staring, and he smiled. You blushed and looked back. And then something soft and warm snaked around your hand. Shifting your attention, you saw that he had taken your hand in his. You huffed. Why so handsy? For a moment his hand let go, but you squeezed harder. I'm not complaining. He sighed. Her Excellency, she doesn't want me to spend time with you, he said. In her opinion, I would forego my duties in favor of you. You blinked. And why is that? In truth, ever since that day where he paused, too embarrassed to say it, and after a moment of awkward silence, he simply continued. Where you called me a good boy, I felt my loyalties shift. He blinked. I'm of course still loyal to the cause and Her Excellency Kokomi, but above all else, I wish to spend time with you. You didn't answer. If I get too attached to you, this would mean I weaken the resistance. Do it to me giving you more attention and resources than you would actually need, endangering Her Excellency Kokomi's strategies. But I just... He looked away. He mumbled something. What? He asked. He mumbled the same thing louder. This time you could only hear the word dog. If it's so embarrassing, and you don't want to say it out loud, it's... I want you to call me a bad dog. Silence. I come to realize that... Yeah, I'm a pervert after all. Goro sounded so genuinely embarrassed it was almost adorable. And I'm the only one who's willing to indulge you in that. You chuckled with an amused grin. I'm supposed to be respected, to lead, give hope, but... Your lips curled up into a smug grimace. But deep down you're nothing but a bad dog, you said seductively. He whined like a puppy whose owner was shouting at him. Instantly having forgotten the meteor shower, you got on all fours and closed the distance to him. And just like you did all those days ago, you brushed your hand through his hair. Immediately he ceased all movement, only to then leap into you, throwing you on your back. Breathing heavily, he pinned you down, leaving only your right arm to freely move. Slowly you reached up, gently brushing over his scalp. His tail swung around excitedly. Closing the distance to your face, he rubbed his cheek against yours. "You're such a bad dog," you mumbled into his ear. He whined desperately, and then something wet touched your skin. You smiled as Goro began to lick over your neck and gently biting into your flesh. Your legs quivered. "That dog," you moaned as your own instincts took over. You grinned, pushing him off of you. Goro looked at you expectantly. "Now, listen to mommy," you said. "I want you to take all of your clothes off." His eyes widened. "And just show mommy how bad my precious boy can be." With childlike glee, Goro peeled himself off of his uniform. And you grinned, impressed. "Ah, you might call yourself a dog," you said with a pleased expression. "But you're human where it counts."